Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Crawl TV. My name is Jarrett, and today I'm going to tell you a little story about the 1958 Cream Puff CJ5 that my friend Luke bought. So if you haven't seen it yet, Luke and I drove all the way from San Diego, where we live, to Santa Cruz, California, all the way through the night to pick up this 1958 Jeep CJ5. We brought it back down to San Diego. Actually, we took it to Luke's house in Carlsbad, and Luke got started right away on working on this thing. But we knew the day that we picked it up that this Jeep was going to need more work than any of the other Jeeps by a mile. It really had a lot going on and it needed a lot of help. So Luke was the perfect person to buy this Jeep because Luke is extremely OCD. He loves cleaning and restoring. Like, that's Luke in a nutshell. He's already restored a beautiful square body Chevy that he allowed me to drive away in after my wedding. And he helped his dad restore an absolutely gorgeous K10 that they just recently sold. He's just kind of always had a collection of vehicles that was unique and very Luke-esque. So when he saw this CJ5 and I saw him see this CJ5, I was like, yes, here we go. This is a match made in heaven. Luke is going to absolutely pamper this Jeep. So when he got it to his house, right away he got started on taking off all the stuff that he didn't like. He removed that spare tire off the back of it. He pumped all the old varnished gas out of it. He pressure washed it, and then he started just very methodically going through piece by piece, pulling out old wiring, trying to get it running a little bit better, looking a little bit better. And then he did something that only Luke would do, and he figured out exactly what was period correct for this Jeep, and those are the things that he purchased. So he went on to KaiserWillies.com and he got the period correct driver's side only mirror for it. He got the period correct round tail lights, and then he bought an entire rebuild kit for his front axle, wheel bearings, hubs, everything. He went as far as wire wheeling his drive shafts just to clean them up and make them look pretty. When I say that Luke is very detail oriented, I'm not kidding around. When we very first got this Jeep into Ronco trailers and we started to take it apart, when we were very first fixing that cracked frame on the front end and Enzo was welding in some fish plates and reinforcing that front bumper, I did notice that his brake calipers were touching his wheels, and I knew that someday down the road in the future this was going to be an issue, but that's much later to come in this story. After we got that front end fixed up, it went back to Luke's house. He washed it even more. There were years of mud and moss all over this Jeep, and it really needed a few days of work just to get all of the crud off of it and out from under it to make it clean enough to actually work on without stuff just falling in your face. And even still, there's just grime and grease caked on from the last 60 plus years all over the transmission and transfer case. And when that thing gets hot and it's running, it really smells like an old vehicle because it's burning off all those old chemicals or whatever else is on there. So after Luke got it cleaned up the second time, I wasn't able to make it down to his house and film any of the progress, but our friend Enzo, the owner of Ronco Trailers, went over to Luke's house multiple nights and completely rewired this Jeep. And I'm not kidding at all. I mean, they had a 5-gallon bucket like this Home Depot bucket here, absolutely brimmed with old wiring, old relays, glass fuses. It was a giant disaster. And basically, I think that the common denominator with all of our Jeeps so far has been bad wiring, but Enzo has also had a hand in the high school Jeep, the Surf and Sahara YJ, and really heavy hand in the Cream Puff CJ5 to get it all fixed up. And they found some really, really bad wiring situations in that Jeep that could have potentially been like a fire hazard. So if Enzo was going to spend time on any one of those vehicles, I'm glad it was Luke's CJ5. So then Luke's parts from Kaiser Willys showed up, and Luke ordered new tie rod and drag links, new tie rod ends, outer wheel bearings, inner bearings, carrier bearings, pinion bearings, new shims. It was essentially just a master rebuild kit for a Dana 25. And we got it to Enzo's shop, and I was showing up there under the impression that we were going to be replacing some wheel bearings, tightening the axle up, and then just draining the diff fluid, cleaning it out with some brake cleaner, doing the old, basic maintenance on an axle. But when I showed up to Ronco Trailers, Luke had already drained the gear oil out of the axle and discovered that it wasn't gear oil at all. It was a combination of mud and water and rust. And the front axle on this Jeep was so incredibly bad that when we opened it up at Ronco Trailers, we had no choice but to completely rebuild the whole axle. And I mean like pulling the pinion out, re-shimming it, new bearings, new carrier bearings, new kingpins, new outer bearings, new axle seals on the inner axle seals, new pinion seals, new everything. So we were there at Enzo's shop until 3 in the morning, first washing all of the parts in a combo mixture of diesel and gasoline just to get all that thick gunk out of it. And then we sandblasted a whole bunch of parts, and then we had to very methodically rebuild and repress all of these pieces back together and get everything set so that this axle could go back under the Cream Puff CJ5 after getting a nice heavy coat of Seymour paint, and then it got all of the Kaiser Willys parts tied in so that it could be ready for TDS. And we had multiple nights working on this Jeep well past midnight just to get this thing to a point where it wasn't going to fall apart the second he shifted it into four-wheel drive. And then we went back another night before TDS, and we were able to get his Bilstein shocks on. We were able to replace the power steering pump, which was kind of a major last minute thing that he needed to get done. And then the night before TDS, our friend Paul went over to Luke's house, and Luke and Paul worked for hours trying to get his brake system bled, because when Luke pulled the front axle, he discovered there was no brake fluid in the front brake lines. So they worked and worked and worked, and they weren't able to get the brakes bled. It wasn't functioning properly, and the master cylinder is really hard to reach because it's up underneath the driver's seat. So they towed the Jeep out to TDS with no brakes and another little surprise maintenance issue that nobody knew about until after we got the brakes bled. So Luke shows up to our Airbnb in TDS. He's running on no sleep at all. He's got the Cream Puff CJ5 on a trailer. It has no alignment. It's 2 inches toe in, and it has no brakes because he couldn't get the brakes bled, and he was stressed out. It wasn't so much like, I didn't get this done and now I can't off-road with you guys. It was like, I didn't get this done and I don't want to make everybody else's trip miserable because now everyone has to work on my stuff. So I think Luke was a little bit stressed out by that because that's the way his mind works. But our friend Chris invited his friend John and Cotto out from Chicago. And I've known John for probably like 7 years now. He's an awesome guy. And John is extremely mechanical and handy and knows a lot about vehicles. So John got straight to work on getting these brakes working. Before the Jeep even came off the trailer, John had the brakes bled to the point where at least there was some kind of resistance in the pedal. And John was able to get the front end aligned so that Luke could drive down the road. Remember that thing I said about the brake calipers touching the inside of the wheels the very first time we started working on it at Ronco Trailers? Well, after John got the brakes bled and the steering figured out on the Jeep, they went ahead and tilted the tilt deck on the trailer and tried to back the Jeep off of the trailer, and the tires would not spin. The brake calipers had worn just a little ball of metal inside of both front wheels so tight that the tires were locked in place. So before we could even go out and test the brakes, we had to remove the front tires, and John actually got my grinder with a flap disc on it and smoothed out the edge of the calipers and smoothed out the edge of the wheels and then put them all back together just so that the Jeep would roll without any kind of heavy resistance or stopping. So we got the Jeep off the trailer in Borrego Springs. I jumped in the passenger seat, and Luke and I took it down the road for the very first time since we test drove it in Santa Cruz. And when we test drove it in Santa Cruz, we couldn't get over 35 miles an hour because the death wobble was so violent in that Jeep. But we get out on the road in Borrego Springs. Luke starts shifting through the gears, starts shifting the overdrive. We got that Jeep up to 65 miles an hour. And when we got back to the house, Luke stomped on the brakes, he locked up the back tires, and we pulled into the driveway, and he was smiling ear to ear because at that point he knew the Jeep runs and drives. It has some brakes and the alignment is okay. And now it's time to enjoy the weekend because all of his major problems were solved. After we got all of this work done, day one of TDS, we started in Borrego Springs, and Tierra del Sol is actually at the Salton Sea, which is about 30 miles away from where our Airbnb was. Luke has driven this Jeep a total of about 300 yards since he bought it 2 months ago. Day one of TDS, we take this Jeep for a 30-minute drive at 65 miles an hour all the way to the Salton Sea, and then we off-roaded it all the way back, and Cream Puff did fine. I'm going to give you a spoiler alert on TDS. Obviously, you know that the high school Jeep has major issues and took probably the most damage of the weekend. But the Cream Puff CJ5 not only off-roaded with us all day on Saturday, the main day of TDS, but after my Jeep was broken and back on a trailer back at the Airbnb, we all went out for a second day of wheeling, and Cream Puff CJ5 wheeled all day on day 2 also. So we pulled all the stops to get this Jeep ready, to get it out there to the desert, and I'm so proud of Luke and everybody involved for all this group effort to get this Jeep from what it was when we got it to 2 full days of off-roading, a full weekend of off-roading with nothing breaking. It's absolutely incredible. And we have to say a huge thank you to Enzo and Ronco Trailers. We really used every piece of equipment in that shop. We made a huge mess. Enzo spent a lot of his time going over to Luke's house, doing all the wiring, and then, providing all the equipment so that we could rebuild these axles. And it was really an impressive team effort to get all of this done. And yeah, I hope you guys liked this video. I hope that you appreciate a little bit of backstory on how we got Cream Puff all the way to TDS. Thank you guys for watching this. The next video will be our TDS trip. It should be coming out in just a couple days, and I hope you like it. Thanks for watching. Crawl TV.